What if I asked you, are you likable? Do people like you? What would you answer? How would you answer that? I think most of us would answer that and say, sure, people like me. But do they really? And why does it matter? How do we know if people like us? Are they just saying that because they don't want to hurt our feelings? Do they really like us? It's important that we know, and we're going to talk about that today, why it's important in all of our relationships, regardless of who those relationships are with. Likability is one of the key factors that help us to have much better, rewarding relationships. So, is it hard to be likable? I think for some people it is. For others it's a little bit easier. But there's things that all of us can do to improve our likability. And we're going to talk about that today. Now there's some people out there that say, you know what, I don't care if I'm likable. Take me as I am. This is me. I don't want to put any effort into being likable. I don't want to change. Just love me for who I am. What do we say to those people? We're going to talk about that a little bit today, a lot today as a matter of fact. And the first thing I'm going to tell you about is the story of the stick. And this is for those of us who don't want to put any effort into being likable, into changing ourselves for the better in this regard. So this story was taught to me by a very wise friend, and I learned a really great lesson out of it. A very simple story, but it's just a great lesson that I think all of us can learn from. So the point of the story is we can choose any stick that's lying on the ground. We can pick that stick up. What we don't get to choose is what's on the other end of that stick. Okay? We pick up one end of the stick, we necessarily pick up the other end of the stick. So, if I choose not to put any effort into being likable, there are consequences at the other end of the stick that are associated with that. I don't get to choose those consequences. I just got to choose the one stick. Consequences come with it regardless of what I do. For those people who say, well, I just don't want to put any effort into being likable. I don't care. I don't think it matters. Why do I have to be likable? Well, there's consequences that go along with that they don't get to choose. And when you find out what those consequences are, I think you'll think twice about that. So, let's take a kind of a humorous example, if you will. Let's suppose that on the weekends, my hobby is I like to go out and plunder and pillage small villages. That's just my thing. That's the hobby that I've taken on, and I really enjoy it. Every weekend I go out and find small villages and I plunder and pillage those and just have a great time. Suppose that I move into your neighborhood and you find out that that's what I do for my hobby, is I plunder and pillage villages. Are you going to welcome me into your neighborhood? Are you going to put your arms out with love and say, please, come and live in our area? Probably not, right? You're probably, best case scenario is you're going to welcome me into your neighborhood, and then you're going to sit me down and say, Brother Emig, you have some changes that need to happen in your life. That kind of behavior isn't appropriate. Worst case scenario is you're going to say, no, you can't move into our neighborhood. We don't want that kind of element in our neighborhood. Those are the consequences from choosing that kind of a hobby. Okay? Like I said, that was a humorous example. Nobody does that. But there are consequences with every single stick we pick up, regardless of what it is. And when we refuse to put any effort into developing our character and improving ourselves, there's consequences that go along with that. So, before we get into some of those consequences, I want to talk about imperial data and anecdotal data for a minute. Imperial data is data that we can test and we can repeat the results of those tests. So we do a study on something, it comes out with a certain set of results. We can repeat that study years down the road and repeat those results. It's repeatable data. Anecdotal data is things like case studies or one-offs, or I heard a story from my brother-in-law's uncle the other day, or I was talking to a friend and he ran into this situation, or I came across this when I was interfacing with somebody the other day. Those kinds of things are not repeatable, and they're not reliable because of that. They're things that just happen in our lives, they're happenstance, and we can't infer too much from those. But empirical data is hard to refute because it's repeatable. So we're going to talk about empirical data today, and in regards to being likable and building that character. This should reinforce why we should be likable in all of our relationships. What we learned today should really reinforce the need for us to be better at being likable in every relationship. It will build every relationship to a much higher level if we're likable. Well, that's one aspect of building good relationships. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions now. You don't have to say yes to any of these, okay? But I want your honest answers. But don't feel obligated to raise your hand and say yes to any of these. Okay, so the first one is, how many of you would prefer good health care to poor health care? Okay, most of us would prefer good health care. In a study by the University of California, doctors gave more time to people that were likable than they did to people that were unlikable. You want better health care? Be more likable. You're going to get more of the doctor's time and effort in helping you have better health. Okay? How many people prefer good health care for their children versus poor health care for their children? Of course, all of us do, right? We all want better health care for our children. We want our children to have a better life than we have. And now some of you are thinking, Brother Emig, are you telling me that my likability has anything to do with the health care my children receive? I am absolutely telling you that. In a study by the St. James University Hospital in Leeds, England, they discovered that children with likable parents receive better health care, and doctors spent more time with the family at the clinics with those families and children whose parents were more likable. So once again, our likability even affects our children's well-being. Okay, we haven't heard the last of this yet. How many of you would like to earn more money? Okay, quite a few of us. Me too. Does our likability affect that? You bet it does. Okay. Social Data Research Corporation did a study and found out that 63% of hiring managers rely on a candidate's likability when hiring and promoting. 63%. They also found out that 62% of those same hiring managers ranked skills second to likability in hiring and promoting. So you want to get ahead in life, in your job, in business, you probably should pay more attention to being likable than even being competent. Not that we don't want to be competent, because we do, but if we're likable, it's going to go a long way in helping us be successful in business. So if you're looking for a better job, you may want to think about working on your likability factor. How many of you want to be successful? Okay, most of us. I do. A study by Yale University claims that people, unlike animals, get ahead by being nice, not by being aggressive. Okay, they actually did a study on this, and aggressive animals get in and they get the food first, and they're bigger and stronger. That's not the way humans, in general, not the way humans progress and are successful. They're successful by being nice, according to that study by Yale. Harvard Business Review says, although managers claim competence trumps likability, in practice, the reverse turned out to be true. If someone is strongly disliked, it's irrelevant if she is competent. People put such a focus, and it's such an important part of getting a job and getting promoted in that job, likability. Yes, we need to be competent, and we should be competent. We should be working on being more competent. But likability, in reality, in practice, trumps what you know. The Social Data Research Corporation did a study and found that people who are popular and positive-minded tend to transcend their socioeconomic status and achieve extraordinary career advancements. Shouldn't come as a surprise to us, right? How many of you like to fail? How many love failure? Show of hands. None of us like failure. Well, then this shouldn't come as a surprise to any of us. But Tim Sanders, who's the author of the book, The Likability Factor, says that unlikable characteristics are the primary reason for failure. It makes sense, doesn't it? If all of these things that we've been discussing, all of these positives come about because of your likability factor, then if you're unlikable, it seems logical that that characteristic would lend itself to us being unsuccessful. We're going to be less successful if we don't have likability skills or traits. I'll bet you didn't see that one coming, did you? How many of you want to be treated better when you're in court? My first question is, why are you in court in the first place? But that's a different story. A study done some years ago found that juries give likable people larger compensation when they win their court case. Okay, so if you like to do better in court, be more likable. How many of you in here are teachers? Okay? A University of Hawaii study found that students who rate their instructor high in likability reward that instructor with better ratings on his overall teaching ability. So if you want to be a better teacher, be more likable. Anybody want to be president of the United States? Anybody? Anybody at all? No. Well, if you did, Gallup conducts a poll and has conducted this poll every year since 1960. And they poll on 3 different character traits, or 3 different factors of candidates for president. And the 3 factors are what their stance is on the issues, their party affiliation, and their likability. And only one of those factors has been a consistent prognosticator for the final election results. Any guesses on what that would be? Sure, it's likability. That's the one factor over all these years since 1960 that has been a consistent prognosticator of who the next president's going to be when they run this study. So, anybody like being married? Okay. A lot of us do. I do. University of Toronto did a study that showed that one of the primary elements of marital success is likability. Go figure. Easygoing, likable people have 1/2 the divorce rate of the general population. So if you like being married, I would encourage you to be likable. Not just to your spouse, but just likable in general. You're going to have a much better chance at keeping your marriage alive and healthy. How many of you love your kids? Now, I didn't say all the time, okay, but generally speaking, how many of you love your kids? Okay, that's better. So Dr. Rabi Azuri says that children that are seen as more likable to the parents are favored and get more attention and affection, which tends to nurture a more relaxed personality in these children. Then they become even more likable, the children, not only to their parents, but to their peers as well. So the well-being of your child, again, highly dependent on likability, both our likability as parents and the likability that we instill in our children. University of Michigan study said that students who perceive a more positive student-professor relationship and like their professors may be more apt to learn. So even from a personal standpoint, we're more likely to learn from people that we deem to be likable. Okay? Children with likable and involved parents were 8 times, think of this, were 8 times more likely to say that their parents were the world's greatest mom or dad. 8 times more likely to do that if their parents were likable and engaged, as opposed to children who had parents who were unlikable or neutral or inconsistent. And that's from a survey done by the Foundation for Childhood Development and Parenting. So, once again, our likability plays a role in our child's well-being. So if your mindset is, I don't care if I'm likable, I don't want to put effort into changing and becoming likable, my suggestion is to rethink that, because it's not all about you. Okay, it affects so many other people, and your children are some of those people that it affects. So, anybody know what the word homophily means? Homophily? Okay, homophily is when you have a tendency of individuals to like people who are like them, who bond with and associate with people who are like them. You know, it's easy for us to be likable in groups of people that think the way that we do, that have the same standards maybe that we do, or who have the same likes and dislikes as we do. But how do we become more likable to the general population? Let's go over some of the points that we can all utilize to become more likable, okay? And we're going to do that by using best practices. Has anybody heard of that term? I'm sure you have. They use it in business a lot. Businesses use best practices all the time. So how do best practices come about? Is there a best practices Bible? Is there some kind of a guru that we all go to for best practices? No. Best practices come about through trial and error. Companies find an issue or a problem, and they think, how are we going to solve this? How are we going to be more efficient, more effective? And they start to try some things. And they try some things, and some things work and some don't, and they keep refining this until finally they do become more efficient and effective. And then other companies see that, and other companies start to imitate them. And it becomes a best practice because it does make companies more efficient. And so that's how best practices come about. We're going to use best practices right now to help steer us and to help improve ourselves as human beings. The independent job site CV Library did a study on 1,200 workers from the UK to find out what the correlation was from those characteristics and traits that tend to make us more likable, and whether there was a correlation with getting ahead in business. And they found out that yes, there is a strong correlation between those things that we tend to think of traits of likable people. Things like being positive, things like being outgoing, happy, smiling. All those traits that we think of when we think about a likable person tend to help us become more successful in business. We've heard that from other studies as well, but it just validates again, being likable has real consequences. So, how are we going to become more likable? Okay, well, there's lots of different ways, and we'll discuss several of them. Let's start with describing people in the positive. A study by Purdue University suggests that when someone says something about someone else, good or bad, the person that they said that to tends to ascribe that trait with the person who said it. So, hope that wasn't too confusing, but if I say something negative about somebody, to you, you're going to think in your mind, well, he's like that. If he said that person was rude, then I'll bet that Brother Emig's rude. If, on the other hand, you were to say something about someone that was positive, you were to say, boy, she's always kind. She's always kind. The tendency is for people to ascribe that characteristic to you, thinking that, yes, this person who just said that is a kind person. That's one way of being more likable. We need to speak highly of others. We can't degrade people.